Hi, I'm Gareth, and in this video we're going to be thinking about how to write better harmony. Now, what I've got on the board here is a piece of harmony that in many ways is kind of textbook stuff. It's perfectly safe harmony. The chords all work. When you're looking at the individual parts, they all kind of flow along quite nicely. There's nothing particularly wrong with it technically. Actually, when you're listening to it, it's just a little bit boring, really. So it sounds like this. So the harmony is perfectly sound, but it's the sort of thing that people do, and then they say, but it doesn't sound very interesting. What can I do to make it more interesting? That's what we're going to do during this time together. Okay, now two things immediately strike me that make that less exciting, less interesting than it could be. One is everybody's moving in the same rhythm all the time. All four parts, exactly the same rhythm. So we've got no rhythmic independence between those four parts. So that's something that would not be too difficult to fix, just to get moments where there's a little bit of rhythmic independence going on in one or more of the parts. The other thing is, if you analyse what's going on in the harmony, it's a little bit basic. Yeah, it's all right. We're in B minor, it starts on chord 1. It goes up to a first inversion. Well, actually, that's quite a good thing to do, to go to 1B there. Then it goes to chord 5. Then we've got 1 again. Then we've got 1 again. Then we've got 5 again. So lots of 1s and 5s, aren't there? Then we go 1 again, and then 5 again. And then we go 1 again. And then 1 again. And then we go 4, 5, 1. Well, is there anything wrong with that particularly? Well, no. We're using our basic chords of the key, chords 1, 4 and 5. They're our primary chords, and the whole harmony is made up of those three chords. So that's okay, but it's going to make it sound a bit boring because we could do with maybe a little bit more chord variety than that somewhere. Part of the chord variety is also about the fact that we've got so many chords in root position. We've only got one first inversion chord that's crept in at the beginning there. Otherwise, everything is in root position, basically going through 1, 5 and just one example of a chord 4 near the end. So no wonder it feels a bit staid, a bit stuck. So without radically changing it, what could we do to make this sound a bit more interesting? And if you're into engaging with this task and you've done a bit of harmony, you may want to pause at this moment and have a go at doing this yourself and then come back and compare it with what I'm going to work through now. Or if you think I just want to stick with this, that's absolutely fine. Okay, now, is anything fundamentally wrong with the harmony of the first bar? I don't think there is really. So I'm not going to suggest anything too radically different because we've got our initial establishment of the key using chord 1, and we have a progression to chord 5 by the end of the bar, and we've used a first inversion chord. So in fact, there are many strengths in the first bar for the reasons I've just outlined. There is a little trick we can play in the bass though that would just spruce this up. You can see that the B moves to a D. So what's to stop me putting in a passing note onto the D? And if I'm going to put a passing note between B and D, which obviously I can do because that's a third and you just need to slip in the note in between, and then that gives you that passing note between two notes that belong to a chord. Well, I could do the same thing here, couldn't I? Because this could then run up to my F sharp. So harmony note, passing note, harmony note, passing note. Suddenly, it just makes the bass line more interesting. Instead of, I've now got, and that gives us a bit of rhythmic independence as well. So the original first bar, in many ways, is perhaps the strongest bar on the whole piece. But stick a few quavers in the bass, sounding rather more interesting, isn't it? Okay, well, if we're going to do that, that seems fair enough. Maybe the next chord is also all right. You know, that's going to take us back to chord 1 again, which is fine. Now, because I've had 1 there, and I've already had 1 there, and I've had 1 there, I wonder if there's an alternative here. This is really a kind of midway phrase point, isn't it? I suppose just to make that clear, we could indicate that, couldn't we? Just to give us an idea that we've got 2 phrases there. Okay, now then, if we've got an imperfect cadence there, finishing on chord 5, well, that could be 1-5, but what are your other options? It could be 2-5, it could be 4-5. Well, I wonder if maybe just by changing that chord, we could get a chord 4 in there, because so far we've got this chord 4, but we haven't got any other 4s. So, you know, if we're not trying to be too adventurous with our harmony, but we've got an option to put another chord 4 in, we might as well, mightn't we? And then maybe we need to sit down on chord 5 here because it's this imperfect cadence we were talking about. There's a little opportunity here now, because we've got E in the tenor, to slip in a passing note there. So do you see, between the E and the C sharp, I can just have that little passing through D. So the first 2 bars, what have I done? Put some passing notes in the bass, put a passing note in the tenor, change one of the chords. Does it sound better? Let's see. Here's the original. You see the problem with that you're going 1-1-5, 1-1-5. That's why I'm trying to break that cycle a bit by using a 4. Listen to the use of 4 and the passing notes. Suddenly sounds better, doesn't it? And there's lots more you could do to this. For example, if you really want to get into this, we could do another little sort of interesting thing here by inserting a suspension. So what would that mean? If I did this in the alto part, that's called a 4-3 suspension, because the B is the 4th above the bass F sharp, the A sharp is the 3rd above the bass F sharp, and it's a suspension because it's prepared, sounded, resolved. Prepared, sounded, resolved. Prepared because it belongs to this B minor chord here, sounded because it clashes with this chord 5, but resolved onto a note that belongs to the chord 5. P and S have to be the same note, S to R have to move by step, usually downwards, so it completely qualifies. So what have we done? We've added some passing notes, we've changed that chord 1 to chord 4, now I've added a suspension in the alto part. What does that sound like? Starting to sound a bit more interesting, isn't it? Okay, now if we go on to the next bar for a moment, well, 1-5-1 again, you know, and we're still maybe thinking we've only got one of these first inversion chords, so maybe we can have something else there. Well, there's a little trick going on here we might just capture. Without changing these chords, when you've got a melody that's going 1, 2, 3 in the key, which is what it's doing, B is the 1st degree, C sharp's the 2nd, D's the 3rd. This is an opportunity for something called a passing 6-4. What's a passing 6-4? Many people will know about this. It's when you go 1, 5C, 1B, or the other way around. 1B, 5C, 1. So I can go 1, 5C, 1B, or the other way around. 1B, 5C, 1. And then the other place I can do it is between 4 and 4B, using 1C. So 4, 1C, 4B, or 4B, 1C, 4. Those are the 2 common uses of a passing 6-4. And it's one of the places where you can use a second inversion chord if you want to. Doesn't have to happen this way, but quite often if the melody is going 1, 2, 3, the bass can go 3, 2, 1, so the same thing in the opposite direction. Or if the melody was going 3, 2, 1, you could do it the other way around. Well, let's try this passing 6-4 thing, shall we? So if I start on D here, and then I come down the scale, you can see what I'm doing. 1, 2, 3, 3, 2, 1. And then if we do this as a passing 6/4, well, we would do something like this. It's just involving a slight reorganization of middle parts for a kind of optimum result. But it's still essentially the same chords. But instead of going 1, 5, 1, I've now gone 1B, 5C, 1. So you see, just by sprucing up the inversions a bit, we're going somewhere. So nothing wrong with the original. 1, 5, 1. Now I've got 1B, 5C, 1. Okay, so it's just making it a bit more interesting, isn't it? Having done that, well, I could go on to my next chord and we could go back to 1, or we could go back to 1B. The reason why I'm suggesting 1B is we've just had 1. So maybe we could hop back to the 1B. And on the same principle of what we've just been saying about the melodic movement between the top and the bottom and the passing 6/4, always look at this possibility. The top part's going D, B, the bottom part's going B, D. So swapping over is something that you can easily do. So we might end up just by putting a first inversion there. That could be quite a nice thing to do. Now you might be looking at this saying, well, I thought we were trying to make it more interesting, but isn't this alto part a bit boring? F sharp, F sharp, F sharp, F sharp, F sharp. Well, yes, it is a bit boring, but actually one of the marks of good harmony is that you often have stability in one of the parts. It's often the alto part, but it sometimes can be the tenor part, where when you're going from one chord to the next, if you've got a note that's common to the progression of chords, you try to sound it in the same part. It gives you a smoother transition between one chord and the next. So the altos won't thank you if you give them thousands of F sharps, but actually it's a sign of a bit of stability there. Now, the other thing you could do, having got this bass line, is, well, what about one of these passing notes in here? Look again. We could do that, couldn't we? And then we could stick with our chord 4. Well, why not? You know, there's nothing wrong with it, is there? So let's put that in. I'm going to just do something in the tenor here. I'm going to make that into a crotchet and have a passing note. Because whenever you've got this movement of a third melodically, you've always got the option to put a passing note in. It doesn't always work, but often it does. And then we can have this. And I'm just thinking, rather than just have these 3 chords going, if we can get some movement, that would be quite nice. So already, yeah. So that would just take the rhythm somewhere. And then we could even do something a bit more nifty here. Now, have a look at this little trick. I'll complete the last chord. And you can sort of see where we're going. So we had 4, 5, 1. I've stuck with the 4, 5, 1. I'm trying to stick with, you know, as much of the original harmony as seems reasonable. You know, we're not over-exciting the choice of chords. We're just trying to make it work better. But just for having a passing note in the tenor there, taking me on to this chord 5, then what I've done is I've put a passing note in the tenor going the other way, on turn E, and that E turns this chord 5 into chord 5, 7. So if you start with a 5 and then you make it 5, 7, it strengthens the chord. So by the time I get to that E, it's strengthened that 5 to a 5, 7. If you write a 5, 7, you just have to be a little bit careful, because when you write a 5, 7, when it resolves, the 7th should fall by step, which it does. The 3rd should rise by step, which it does. So that's lucky, isn't it? So the last 2 bars originally were this. And now we've got this. So what I've tried to demonstrate there is by keeping 3 parts exactly the same, and just by altering one part, we can make it actually transform a bit. Now you might want to do this little trick at the end. and turn this D into a D sharp. Well, why would I want to do that if I'm in the key of B minor? Well, that's something called a TS Picardy. It only works in this instance when you're in a minor key, but you decide instead of using the tonic chord, chord 1 at the end, you borrow chord 1 or the tonic chord from the tonic major key. We're in B minor, I'm borrowing that chord as chord 1 in B major, and it gives you this kind of brighter major finish. So I'm in a minor key here and I finish on a major chord. So how does all that come together? That's rather nice, isn't it? To have that brighter, more optimistic finish. Okay, so that's all good. You know, are there other things we could do? Absolutely. You could, for example, decide you're going to put a passing note in the bass here. And that's another instance where you end up with a chord 5, and by adding the passing note, it becomes 5-7. This time, rather interestingly, 5-7 in last inversion, a 5-7 D chord. Does the 7th fall by step? Yes, it does. Does the 3rd rise by step? Yes, it does. Well, that's absolutely fine, isn't it? Okay, have a listen to the original again. Okay, listen to our spruced up version. Now, you could do much more with that. You could experiment with more interesting chords, for example. We could use chromatic chords. We could use chords within the key that are just a bit more exciting. What I'm trying to demonstrate here, though, is how would you take that? Say that was your first draft of something where you spent ages choosing chords that fit, writing parts that fit, avoiding breaking any rules of harmony like consecutive fifths, consecutive octaves, double major thirds, all that kind of stuff, where the voice leading all kind of works all right. How would you then take that and turn it into draft 2? And I'm suggesting here that you've got something that would make it a rather more interesting thing. Is there more you could do? Absolutely. I mean, you might decide that some of this stuff, the tenor part could do something like this in the 3rd bar. And it would get even more interesting, wouldn't it? You could use a diminished 7th chord here, for example. That would make it even more interesting, a bit of chromatic colour there with a diminished 7th, you know? So there are lots of possibilities there, aren't there? We could use a chord 6 at this point instead of that chord 1. So there are things we could do to take it even further. We could do something like have a secondary dominant into F sharp major at this point by going 5-7 to 1 in F sharp. So how about we did 5-7B with an E and the bass turned to E sharp, and then to F sharp major before finishing on a tierce de Picardy. So that would enrich the harmony yet further. So those are ideas for people who are comfortable writing harmony and were thinking, oh yeah, how could I actually choose a few chords that would give it an extra spice? But the main point here is there's a piece of basic harmony. This is how you might transform it so it becomes something that's much more effective. So I hope that gives you a few ideas as to how to go about this particular task.